Morning everyone. So your read today is going to be interesting facts on Guy Fawkes. I've been searching around for lots of interesting information on Guy Fawkes and I found quite a lot. Some of which I didn't even know. So here we go. So Guy Fawkes was born on April 13th, 1570, in the northeast of England. He was born in York in a place called Stonegate, and he went to a school that still exists today called St. Peter's School in York. He had a mum and a dad. His mum, when his dad passed away, his mum remarried. He was born a Protestant. Now that's important as to how he became involved in the gunpowder plot. So he became a Protestant, but when his mum remarried, he converted to being a Roman Catholic. So our fact one is that he was called Guy Fawkes, and he was born on April the 13th, 1570. That's our fact one, in York. Our fact two was that he was a Protestant, but he converted to being a Catholic, and by the Roman Catholic faith. So, and he couldn't worship that freely in England. So that was one of the reasons why he was quite keen to be involved in the gunpowder plot. So up to 1603, England and Scotland were ruled as two separate nations with two different monarchs. That's kings or queens. And it was only after the death of Queen Elizabeth I that King James I, who was by then King James VI of Scotland, was next in line for the throne. So that's what joined the throne of England and Scotland together. So he becomes King James I of England, but he's James VI of Scotland. And he becomes the first king to rule both nations. And that is what goes on to create the United Kingdom that we know today. And some English people didn't want a Scottish king on the throne at all, because it was a Protestant king as well. And the gunpowder plot would have put an end to that, because obviously the king opens, or the head of state, as in our king or queen, opens parliament. And so it would have he would have killed our king at that time. So that's our fact two. Our fact three is that Guy Fawkes was an experienced soldier. So he joined up and he fought in a war. He fought for the Spanish. He didn't fight in an English army. He fought for the Spanish against the Dutch. And in fighting for the Spanish, and this is a clue actually, because he changed his name. He changed his name to the Spanish version of Guy, which was Guido. So he became Guido Fawkes when he was fighting in Spain. He was fighting in the Netherlands for the Spanish, and that was because he wanted, for two reasons. He wanted to sound more Spanish, but also because he was Catholic and he wanted to sound more Catholic, basically. Spain was a Catholic country at the time, and he just wanted to sound more important and to fit in better, and also because it made him seem more attractive to girls. There's no other way of saying that. And it's where he got an experience of using explosives, and where he met Robert Catesby. That's where and Thomas Percy, that's where they first start to learn or know of him and know that he's a soldier. That's where they first find out that he's somebody that they could be thinking of. So our fact. So that fact about him changing his name to Guido, whilst he obviously kept his surname the same, is also important, because when he's arrested, when they find him in the cellar of the Houses of Parliament, or the Palace of Westminster it's also called, he doesn't give his real name. he first gives them the name of John Johnson. That's what he first tells them his name is. And then when he signs the confession to say that he is involved in the gunpowder plot, he doesn't tell them his name is Guy Fawkes. He signs it as Guido Fawkes. So once again, he's not using his actual real birth name. So that is, again, that's our fact, our next fact. So that's our fact 2 finished. Or fact 3, sorry. I knew I'd forget my numbers. So we're on to fact 4. So in fact 4, we all know Guy Fawkes. We all know him. He is what we consider the person that we remember the gunpowder plot for. But he wasn't the main person for the gunpowder plot. He was the lookout guy. He was the guy that was going to light the gunpowder. He was basically what we know as the fall guy, the guy that was going to take the blame. That if they had to catch somebody, he was the guy that they could catch and put in prison for blowing up the Houses of Parliament, because the other people were too important. Basically, in 1605, everybody else was too important because they were noblemen, and Guy Fawkes wasn't. So he was the lookout guy, the fallout guy. He had one of the most important roles, though, because he had to light the gunpowder. And below the Houses of Parliament, the cellars were rented out, and that's how they had access to them. And it was filled with 36 barrels of gunpowder, like you already know. And that was enough gunpowder that it would have completely destroyed the building and all of the buildings around the Palace of Westminster and the Houses of Parliament within a mile. So if you can imagine a circle around the Big Ben and all of the buildings in a mile radius around that. So radius just means if you had the building here, the circle around that for a mile out, for a whole mile, would have been destroyed with that much gunpowder. But the gunpowder had gone off. So even if he'd managed to light it, there's a chance it wouldn't have blown up and it wouldn't have destroyed the Houses of Parliament. Now, they didn't know that the gunpowder was off because the only way to test it was to set it on fire and to light it. They wouldn't have known it was gone off. It had gone off. So it actually decayed. So it wouldn't have exploded at all. So that's, quite, it's called irony. They got all of this gunpowder, but it wouldn't have actually done damage because it had decayed. It wasn't strong enough to blow up anything. If anything, it might have just caught fire and caused a little bit of damage that way. And actually, there was a fire in the cellar that the gunpowder was stored in 200 years later and destroyed the Houses of Parliament in the actual cellar that the gunpowder was stored in and just completely wiped out. So a fire in those cellars, would have destroyed the Houses of Parliament if the fire had started there. So they were right in the right place. Fact number 5. Now, despite all of this and the gunpowder plot, and I find this quite incredible, and this was something I hadn't really paid attention to, despite that Guy Fawkes was involved in this plot against our king and a lot of our government at that time, in a list of people that we consider the best people in Britain in 2002, so 18 years ago, the country was asked to say who they thought were the best people in England and Wales and Scotland combined and Ireland combined. And Guy Fawkes was named the 30th on that list out of anybody that they could think of, out of all the special people in Britain. Guy Fawkes was named 30th, despite the fact that he was going to blow up our king. Isn't that bizarre? Fact number 6. After Guy Fawkes was discovered, he was taken straight to the king. So he's taken straight to the king. Sorry, I had to just pause you a second there. Because the king couldn't understand why anybody would want to kill him. He's just been made the king of the Britain and Scotland. He's King James I. And he just didn't know. So he wanted to know, he wanted to understand why somebody would want to kill him. He just didn't get it. So the king calmly says to him, "Why do you want to kill me?" And Guy Fawkes calmly is said to have answered, "To blow you Scotch beggars back to your own native mountains." He really didn't want a Scottish king on the throne. I'm just trying to find what else I wrote. 2 seconds, I wrote something else. King James found this manner quite admirable, that Guy Fawkes he was meeting the king to try and explain to him why, and he wanted an explanation as to why he was going to blow up the Houses of Parliament and the Palace of Westminster, and he was quite adamant. He's quite forceful about why he was going to do it. And King James described Guy Fawkes as having the resolution of a Roman soldier. That's how he felt, that he stood there like a Roman soldier, determined. And that Guy Fawkes was really regretful that he wasn't going to be able to still go out there and blow up the Palace of Westminster in front of the king, knowing that he'd been arrested for treason. So, yes, he'd won the admiration of the king, even though he was trying to kill him. So that was our fact 6. Are we on to fact 6? I've lost count again, guys. Fact 5. Oh, I don't know. I've lost count. No, that was fact 6. Fact 7. Now, this is a horrible subject. So, in terms of how they got the information out of Guy Fawkes, they didn't do it a nice way. They didn't just ask him questions. They started off doing that, just asking him politely, "Please, could you tell me who you were working with?" But Guy Fawkes just wouldn't tell him. They was used to being asked those kind of questions. He was a soldier in the Spanish army. He was used to being questioned. So they decided that they would use some nasty, horrible methods to get information from him that I'm not going to explain. And they were hurtful. And it took 4 days for Guy Fawkes to start admitting that he had an part to play in the gunpowder plot, even though it'd been found, and he'd already admitted it to the king. And also to give names of people involved. So it had taken a lot of effort on the part of the people questioning him to get this information from him. And he actually, like I said, signed the confession Guido Fawkes, not Guy Fawkes, but having initially given his name as John Johnson when he'd been arrested, he wasn't going to sign his true name to the confession. And that confession document is actually still held in our National Archives in London. You could go and see it. You could still see it. And it was, so he signed his confession. He gave over the names of the co-conspirators. They're people that have come together and decided that they're going to do something. It's called conspiring, which is where you get conspirators from. And they're going to do a nasty, so when you, in the medieval times, which is the 1600s, they do a nasty way of getting rid of you when you are convicted for treason. And it's called hung, drawn and quartered, which is how they get rid of the body. Now, people believe that Guy Fawkes was hung, drawn and quartered. Interesting fact, he wasn't. They started it, but he was so frightened of dying that way that he managed to slip the noose around his neck and jumped off Tower Bridge and broke his neck. So he actually technically committed suicide. and jumped off and broke his neck and died that way. And then they broke him up into pieces and put his head on Tower Bridge, as they would do for traitors, on Traitors' Gate, to let people know that actually treasoners are not allowed in London at all. So that's that interesting fact. Next fact, because remember I've lost count. There is an island in the Galapagos named after Guy Fawkes. It is called Isla Guy Fawkes, which means Guy Fawkes' Island. Do we think it was named after him because that's where he was going to escape? Or did they just like the story and think he was a martyr, so they named it after him? Nobody will ever know. Next fact. Because people were so pleased for what Guy Fawkes had done and they wanted to celebrate him, two things happened. Obviously, we celebrate Guy Fawkes Night with Bonfire Night every November the 5th, but a guy is a straw effigy. So every Guy Fawkes, a straw creation, like a scarecrow, is made of Guy Fawkes. This happened every year after 1605 to be burnt on a bonfire, to remember the bad men that started the gunpowder plot. But it also was made in remembrance of. So for the people that celebrated Guy Fawkes, they made it as a remembrance to remember his life. But for the people that didn't agree with the plot, it was made against them and to burn them for what they did was wrong. But also the name Guy entered into our dictionary as meaning a bad person. So in the medieval times, in the 1600s, if you referred to somebody as a guy, you meant a bad man. So that was the next fact. Now, every year, this is very funny. I think this is a tradition now. But every year, without fail, our Houses of Parliament are searched for gunpowder and explosives. The cellars are searched. The cellars where the gunpowder was hidden no longer exist. They were destroyed in the fire that I told you about in 1834. They no longer exist anymore. But it's now tradition that they are still searched on the day that they found Guy Fawkes in them. That day they are still searched every year, and it's become a tradition. It's not really seen as a counter-terrorism measure. They are still searched once a year, so that nobody's hiding. It's just something that they do. It's a tradition now. So I think that's quite sweet that they still do it all these years on. I think that was all the facts I found. I'm just trying to... Yes, that's all I found. So there are your facts about Guy Fawkes. Tomorrow we'll be back to traditional tales because that's all I could find. The date that Guy Fawkes died, I should just say, is January the 31st, 1606. That's the date that he finally died. So yes, have a lovely day. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.